Hi, my name is Steph. I love to read otherworldly books, and today I'm here to talk to you about pickle books. Now you may be wondering, what is a pickle book? And it's okay if you don't know because I completely made it up. I describe a pickle book as a book that leaves you with a sour aftertaste, but in a positive way. So those books that haunt you or alter you or just really make you think. But okay, let's get into this because these are really heavy. First up, The Devourers. Now this is a really slow burn book. It's dark and it's long, and it's this really great ode to storytelling. It's got this beautiful messaging about legacy and reckoning with identity and who controls your identity. The book follows this college professor who meets this mysterious stranger on a mysterious night under the full moon in India. The stranger claims he's a half werewolf, and the professor is like, okay, sure, but I'll hear you out anyway. And then the stranger asks him to transcribe this really bizarre collection of texts. He's kind of transfixed and he's very curious, so he takes it on, and then as he begins to transcribe, these scrolls transport him back to 17th century India, where this very violent shapeshifter has this obsession with a human woman. The stories get deeper and stranger, and the professor's relationship with the stranger also begins to deepen, especially as the stories get closer to the present. The Devourers has very mixed reviews on Goodreads, and I completely understand why. This is a book that you either have to lean into or you might just push it away. It's got a very specific style and a lot of gore and kind of gross content, and I can totally see why it wouldn't be for everyone. It's just so slow and unusual, it almost feels like it wasn't written by a modern writer. Anyway, like I was saying, it can be a very uncomfortable book at times. It leans into this visceral experience of gore and flesh and urine and all these animalistic tendencies. The world it's setting up is very, very violent. It's also a queer and more specifically trans allegory. Every character is really puzzled by their relationship to their own body. They challenge what you were born to do and be and how the world is and predator and prey and all of these sorts of assumptions. It ponders storytelling as intimacy and how the stories told about you shape the footprint that you leave in this world. It also views myths and folklore not as these separate cultural stories, but as different ways of shaping the same existence. And yes, of course, there's hunger and craving and devourings of all forms. It can be grotesque, but also quite beautiful. I mean, what does it mean to devour someone, or to let yourself be devoured, to give yourself over completely to someone else? Or when you're devouring another, to take that othered experience and incorporate it into your identity, yourself, your body. I'm not sure that every angle of the story came together to tell a complete whole for me, and it definitely meandered at times, but it also made me think. It's draining, and its view of the world is very pessimistic, but it's also got some beautiful prose and some striking metaphors. My next pickle book is The Women Could Fly. This book takes place in a world where magic is real, so obviously it's viewed as fearsome and unholy, and of course it's used to oppress and control women, especially queer women of color. Our main character is Jo, and she's almost 28 years old. Now this is pretty crucial because the Bureau of Witchcraft requires that you be married by the time you're 30, or you're going to be very strictly monitored for witchcraft. But of course, how can you possibly figure out if you're falling in love for real or if it's out of necessity? And how can you care for someone who ultimately has full power over you and not let that turn into toxicity or resentment? Jo is awesome, and she doesn't want to give up her life, but the odds are stacked against her because she has an absent mother. More on that later. She's black, she's bisexual, and she speaks her mind all the time with wit. But back to her mother. She disappeared 14 years ago, and Jo is still struggling with the fallout of that. Of course, there's the pain of having a parent leave you, but also because her mother left, she's viewed as a likely witch, and Jo is treated with more suspicion because of her proximity to a likely witch. But it's been 14 years, and Jo is ready to move forward, so she decides to declare her mother as legally dead, and when she does, she uncovers a will. Now this will is offering a lot of money, but in order to claim that money, she has to take a mysterious trip to a mysterious island. In this world, any simple act of autonomy is an act of defiance. So these oppressors, even though it's a speculative world, the language that they use is very similar to things that we hear today. Jo is seeking agency that those in power feel like she doesn't deserve, and so the language they use against her is that nonsense rhetoric that we hear all the time. So yeah, it's rage-inducing, and it also feels very, very real. The story is slow-paced, and a lot of the world building is intentionally vague. There are also things that feel like they contradict each other. I think it makes sense because this world is inherently nonsensical. It's very choppy at times, and it is not doing any of the work for you. It's putting it out there and expecting you, the reader, to engage and sort of ask these questions to yourself. And there's so much rich content here. I think this book would be perfect for a book club. Anyway, we know that people fear what they don't understand, and this book is a perfect example example of that. I think it's got a new and interesting way of exploring this concept, and I found the book challenging and upsetting and very prescient. Next up, Fledgling. Of course, I've got to include an Octavia Butler book in this pickle book selection because all of her books sort of qualify, but Fledgling really makes me squirm. It deconstructs everything that we've been told to accept in vampire literature. And I think this is everything a vampire novel should be. It's dark and it's distressing and it's uncomfortable. We follow Shori, who is a 53-year-old vampire, but she appears in the body of a 10-year-old girl. She wakes up in a cave with total amnesia of like her background or how she got there. So she has to relearn all of her identity and customs and try to stay safe while someone is trying to hunt her down and kill her. Butler offers so many thoughts here on racism, power, identity, consent, mental health, so much more. And a lot of scenes involve Shori, who again is 53 but looks like a 10-year-old girl, in sexual situations with adults. Obviously, this is incredibly distressing to read, but it also makes you think, like, why aren't we more uncomfortable with these power gap vampire situations in books? They usually involve minors, I mean older minors, teenage girls, but with their 100-plus-year-old counterparts. It is a lot of detail and exposition just thrust right at you, and unfortunately it ends in a bit of a cliffhanger because Butler was going to write a sequel but never got the chance. But it's a really thought-provoking read, and the culture of the vampires was so fascinating. There's so much in here about different power imbalances and about racism and prejudice. Just a quick example, because Shori is black, she can actually stay out during the day, but her blackness also puts her in constant danger. Anyway, this one will stick with me forever. Next up, I had to include a very recent read, which was Chain Gang All-Stars. This is a bone-chilling dystopian piece that offers really interesting insight into incarcerated folks and racism and abuse of black bodies, even in sports and so on. And it's through the eyes and voices of the characters that continue to love and to humanize themselves and to fight back. So in this world, there are gladiator-style deathmatch fights between prisoners. It's all the rage, it's making a ton of money, and people from around the world tune in to see these gladiators fight and to, bet on them and cheer them on and attend fights in the arenas. There are some folks, like the abolitionists, who are protesting, but the money keeps coming. We're following two of the major players here, Thurwar and Stax. Thurwar is only a couple of fights away from freedom, and she's thinking about her legacy and, what she's gonna do afterwards and how she's gonna protect the links that come after her. But the game masters know they have a star on their hands, and they're trying to milk her popularity until the last minute, and they might just change the rules along the way. We bounce around between so many different interesting POVs, so of course we've got like the brutal games themselves, but then the prisoners outside of the games, and the really nasty corporate boardrooms, and the living rooms of people who are engaged, and the protesters. We get this vast, unflinching look at a world that doesn't seem too far off from our own. It's dark and it's clever, but it is not at all subtle. This is right in your face, and there are footnotes about real people and prison statistics and current cases. And there's commentary, of course, about the American prison system and how it ties to systemic racism, but there's also criticism of entertainment and sports media and how we also abuse black bodies in those spaces. All of these POVs were so fascinating to me, even if I didn't like all of them. I felt like I got so much insight into this world. And a lot of these short chapters with new POVs felt like really well executed short stories. This is a world with very fancy technology and elevated forms of punishment, but it also shows how solitary confinement is still one of the most horrifying things you can do to a person. I mean, in this story, people choose matches to the death over solitary confinement. Okay, everything I've been saying is pretty gory and violent, but I do want to say that there's a lot of compassion and love in this book. These characters fight so fiercely, and they hang on to their humanity, and we also get really interesting views of abolitionists who don't have all the answers yet, but still believe in a better world. Okay, I have 3 more book recs for you all, but they're just for my bindery subscribers. So if you want to get all the recs, just click the link in my description to check out my bindery. It combines all of my content across all platforms. It has this really cool searchable bookshelf where you can see the videos where I talked about books and a collection of all the books I've talked about recently, and there's an exclusive Discord channel, and there's exclusive content, and so much more. Thanks for hanging out with me, and I'll see you next time.